Thank you all for coming, everybody. And I want to thank my colleagues for being here, and hopefully we're expecting two more, but obviously a little excitement on Capitol Hill, the wrong kind of excitement, so give everybody a little bit of leeway. But I'm Shelley Capito, and today we are launching the Senate Broadband Caucus. This is something that I feel very passionate about, as do my colleagues, Senator Angus King, Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Heidi Heitkamp, and Senator John Bozeman, because all of us represent states that face major challenges. I'll just tell you a little bit about my state of West Virginia. We rank 48th in the nation for broadband accessibility. 30% of West Virginia residents do not have access to broadband. Imagine this, living and working here in Washington, D.C., as I see the phones going out like I do, imagine if you couldn't get your email. And in rural areas of our state, our whole state's rural, but in more rural areas of our state, that number can go as high as 48%. So broadband access is critical to our economy. As you know, we have a coal economy. We're being asked to transition. We can't transition without broadband, or we have to do it with one hand tied behind our back. So essential broadband infrastructure is falling behind in certain parts of the country, and the digital divide between rural and urban area is growing. You can see by this chart here on the digital divide, we were just talking about our respective states. My state here, we have a very small pocket of yellow that's really in the Morgantown and probably Charleston area, but you can see it's in the more urban areas, and then the more rural you get, the less frequent it is. So I announced last year my West Virginia Capito Connect plan. It has a nice ring to it. And we're going to expand on that effort today with the Broadband Caucus. I think we're well positioned to make a much needed impact. We've all been working on it in our own separate ways, and Angus and I have worked on a bill to try to find some innovative ways in education to try to expand access. And we want to find solutions. Somebody asked me, press person asked me on the way over to vote, what are you trying to do? And I said, we're just trying to get creative ideas here. We know money can solve all issues, but I'm not even sure in this case that's the real thing. There's a lot of creativity, I think, that we're hoping to engage a broad range of industries and other stakeholders and close that digital divide in rural states like West Virginia. So we're not only supported by our colleagues, and we're going to be getting more colleagues as we expand this and kick this off today, but we also have some important industry organizations. Some of them I think are represented here today. The NTCA, which is the Rural Broadband Association, the CTIA, which is the Wireless Association, National Cable and Telecommunications Association, U.S. Telecom, Competitive Carriers Association, Encompass, Next Century Cities, and Engine. And I think we see that the conglomeration of folks that we have and the more that we'll be building, we can see the economic development aspects of expanded broadband. And expanded broadband, in my view, is not just getting service to an unserved. There are a lot of underserved areas. The speed becomes extremely important, I think, in order for us to realize that if you have for every $5 billion invested in broadband, 250,000 jobs can be created. With every percentage point increase, another 300,000 jobs has a direct impact on economic development. So I think the need for action is clear, and this issue transcends party affiliation and state lines. It's an issue, I think, of national consequences. It's not just an economic development issue in my mind. It's a healthcare issue for all of our telehealth and telemedicine, and it's also an education issue. You send a child home with an assignment and assume that they can get service, and they can't get service to their home, they come back into the classroom behind. And that's a disadvantage. In a lot of rural areas, it's a disadvantage for that child. If you have a lot of snow days, which we had a lot of snow days last year, if you have a lot of snow days, good way to keep the education going is to have that service at home. So I'd like to introduce Senator Angus King. You can see our 5 states here, how much lacks access. And West Virginia, I hate to say it, we're tied with Arkansas for 48% of our state is lacking access. You're doing pretty good up there, 17%. Your trees are not accessing. That's what you. But anyway, welcome to Angus, and then we'll hear from Senator Heitkamp. Yeah.
I want you to imagine that it's 80 years ago. And we're having this meeting, only it would be in Russell because this building didn't exist. And we're forming the National Electricity Caucus because the arguments would be almost identical. Rural America without electricity couldn't function. And providing electricity to rural areas of America was a radical idea in the 1930s. And in fact, it took an act of Congress and the leadership of Franklin D. Roosevelt to create the Rural Electrification Program that brought the benefits of electricity to all of our country. Many of the arguments were the same. People lived too far apart, it was too expensive, the wires had to be too long, there were too many poles, we can't serve these regions of the country. We would not be able to function as a country without rural electrification. This is exactly the same issue. It's exactly the same issue. Failure to provide broadband to rural areas of America is a death sentence for the communities in those regions. They cannot compete economically without access to broadband. It's as simple as that. It's not only a disadvantage for business, and disadvantage is too weak a term. It's not only a killer for business, it's a disadvantage simply for living. Imagine those of you in this room going to a realtor in a nice town in Maine or West Virginia or North Dakota or Idaho or Arkansas or anywhere else in the country, Minnesota, and the realtor takes you around and shows you the house and everything and says, well, this is really a nice house, but by the way, you can never have water here. Or what happens is, by the way, there's no broadband. I would argue that many people will say, sorry, I can't live in that house, particularly younger people, for whom access to the internet and to access to the world through broadband is such a basic part of their daily lives. So we don't have a particular legislative agenda, except that we want to see, number one, coordination of federal efforts in this area. We want to see that what we can do to bring together the various resources, because we've got the Department of Agriculture, we've got the Small Business Administration, we've got the Commerce Department, we've got the FCC. There are many ways this problem is being dealt with across the federal government, but we believe that there has to be some coordinated national strategy. This is urgent. This is urgent. Businesses are leaving rural areas today, and people are failing to move into rural areas today because of their lack of access. Ironically, this is happening at a time when the development of the internet allows a resurgence of rural areas. For the first time in human history, you can work where you live instead of having to live where you work. It creates enormous opportunities for rural areas of our country, which, after all, are wonderful places to live. And people looking to change their lifestyle and enjoy those regions, but the necessary requirement in order to make that happen is decent broadband. And so that's really what we're talking about today. I consider this a very high priority, a very important issue. And as Senator Capito mentioned, it also involves things like telemedicine. It involves the ability to deliver services to people in rural areas, particularly the elderly. And this is an enormous opportunity. So I'm delighted to join with my colleagues. It is absolutely a nonpartisan issue. Notice I said nonpartisan, not bipartisan. I'm trying to educate these guys about nonpartisan versus bipartisan. But this is an issue that has no real partisan overtones. This is something about providing to all areas of the country the basic infrastructure for success in the 21st century. So with that, I want to welcome my colleague from North Dakota, another state that has large rural areas. And by the way, I think I can't emphasize enough that the rural areas of our country have so much to offer to their residents, and this one little missing piece we have to plug in order to complete the picture of having a vibrant and vital economic sector, because there's so many contributions that can be made, and people often want to live away from urban areas, but we have to be sure that they can get the basic infrastructure necessary to do so. Senator Heitkamp.
Thank you. Well, what a great turnout. Thanks for coming to what I hope will be one of the most significant and active, active caucuses in the United States Senate. Why is that? Because we can't survive in rural areas without broadband. We cannot continue to lose population to metropolitan areas. And it's interesting, I do economic development seminars across the country and across North Dakota, and talk a lot about rural economic development. And we used to say things like, you know, if we only had more primary sector jobs, if we only had more manufacturing jobs, more ag processing jobs, we'd keep rural America populated. I was up in the northeastern part of my state, and I found out a little something about what's happening in rural development. Guess what? We have 80 primary sector jobs that are going unfilled because we can't find workforce. Why can't we find workforce? Because those are communities folks don't want to live in. They want something different than what is currently available. Why is that? You talk about why that is, and I use this example, and I use it quite a bit. I said, until we figure out a way that every American citizen can stream Netflix, there'll be portions of our economy that are going to fail. There'll be portions of our state that are not going to survive. Because where we used to talk about whether people wanted to live in rural areas, whether they could get a pizza delivered, we now talk about whether they can watch, you know, Orange is the New Black, or whether they can watch Game of Thrones. But my point is that as we have built out this opportunity, Fargo, as we've built out this opportunity to grow rural America, which suffers at much higher rates of poverty than urban America. It's something that goes untalked about. And Amy just did a great roundtable where we brought in experts from all over talking about rural poverty. This issue always comes to the front. This issue is always number one. And it goes beyond, I say, you know, streaming Netflix kind of facetiously, but I will tell you, think about a critical access hospital that cannot afford to keep a doctor on call but needs to provide emergency medicine. How are you going to do that without telemedicine? And how are you going to do telemedicine without broadband? Think about a school where you can't get a high school Spanish teacher because there's only 3 kids maybe in the graduating class, or maybe 2 kids who want to study Spanish. This resource allows us to do amazing things in rural America. If you walk through, we've got a couple centers in North Dakota. One is an Amazon customer service center in Grand Forks. If you walk through Aetna, which is a service center for an insurance company in Bismarck, and you see half of the desks are empty. And the management is quick to say, that doesn't mean people aren't working. Those desks used to be filled by people who now live in Napoleon and work from home. Those desks used to be filled by people who live in Minto and now work from home. They don't commute to work. And we find out they're even that much more productive because they don't have to brave the weather. But without broadband, you cannot get this done. And the final point I want to make is the numbers. And we've been talking a lot about this. When we did a hearing on broadband access in the Indian Affairs Committee, what you heard is varying degrees and differences about what it means to have access. Does it mean economic access, that you can afford it? Does it mean that you actually have a wire that comes to your house or fiber that comes to your house? We don't know how accurate these numbers are. And that's not a knock on anyone. I think that we do not have the right kind of record keeping. And so my first pledge would be to find out where we are exactly in our states, because I've done that with our rural telecoms, and I can tell you there's parts, because of the help of USDA, there are parts of North Dakota, rural North Dakota, that are much better connected than Fargo, North Dakota, our largest city. So we can't generalize about what this is. We've got to get the right statistics. We've got to get the right kind of numbers so that we can truly analyze where the need is and how we fulfill that need. And we have to build on partnerships. And the last thing I'm going to say is about some of my friends at a couple internet service provider companies, one in particular, which is very active in North Dakota, South Dakota company. Won't mention the name. But they've done something that a lot of other companies haven't done. For $10 a month, they will bring in Wi-Fi, a router and a modem, into a home just for $10 a month, and they've even bought computers for kids. Because as we go to flipped classrooms, as we go to new techniques of teaching, kids who are impoverished will fall further and further behind. So it's not just about having the wire there. It's how can they access that wire and how much does that cost? So there's economic access and there's physical access. We need to be realistic about what we know right now so we can fill in the gaps. And just as Angus said, as he stole my entry line, when he started out, he did. Unbeknownst to the two of us, is that 40 years ago, 50, 60 years ago, if I were a senator from North Dakota named Bill Langer, who was a crazy guy, kind of a famous senator, he used to bring out the officials from the rural electrification movement, people who were Federal Power Administration, and he would sit them on a dais, and he would have all these farmers and rural people come, and they would say, when are we going to get our electricity? We need to know when we're going to get our electricity. And eventually he would just turn to the federal official, he goes, you're going to deliver that electricity in the next year, right? And what could you say? Back then, senators actually had power. So you had to say yes. But the point is that without Shelley's great work here and the rest of us joining together in the caucus, we aren't going to shine that big light that's going to say how important and critical this is. And so I know not only do I share a passion for this with my neighbor to the east, but I share a big border. It's called the Red River. And Amy, I know she feels just as passionately about this, but don't forget disadvantaged communities when we're talking about this. Thank you so much. I'll leave your stuff here.
Well, thank you so much, Heidi. Thank you, everyone. And it's really exciting to do this. I like the logo, Shelley. It's very cool. And it's such a great group of senators with Senator King and my neighbor, Senator Heitkamp, Senator Bozeman, and of course, Senator Capito. Thank you so much for doing it. I was actually stunned. I used this number today, and so every so often you give a speech and then you can't believe that maybe there's an error. I know my colleagues have had this thing, that only 39% of rural America, or 39% of rural America lacks access, that much. That's a huge number. And when I think about a decade ago when I started advocating for this, it has changed so much. Back at the beginning, it was about access, right? Do people have access at all? Can they dial a phone and get some kind of access so that they can send one email to their kid in college? Well, it's changed. And now it's all about high-speed access and whether or not people can be able to keep their businesses going. And I see Commissioner Rosenworcel back there, one of my favorite people in Washington for many reasons, but one of them is that she has a hard last name like mine. So we unite for the many people that can't pronounce it. And I know that we have many representatives of organizations working on this, the Competitive Carriers Association, the Wireless Association, CTIA, Engine Advocacy, Encompass, Next Century Cities, the National Cable and Telecom Association, the World Broadband Association, U.S. Telecom, and we've been really jump-starting our efforts lately. And that is because of what I said at the beginning. We have literally farmers and small businesses now that every single day they drive 20 miles to the McDonald's parking lot to do their work. That's how they start the day. I'm sure they like an Egg McMuffin, but that's not why they go there. They go there because it's the only way for them to have high-speed access and to be able to download the things that they want to download. We have one company in western Minnesota that actually, to connect up with their farmers after avian flu and the concern about what was going in the barns, and they wanted to regulate the temperature, they built their own fiber. Now, that is not workable for most areas. That's just a couple dozen farms, but that happened in Minnesota. Leech Lake Reservation, a one home with Wi-Fi. Mom looks out the window, all these kids are out there. They're doing their homework because they're able to get the access that they need. So these things are happening today. And I have always said that kids that grow up in rural America should be able to live and work in rural America. And right now, if you don't have Wi-Fi, you can't do that. So that's why this caucus is so important. We know what the solutions are. Obviously, getting the investment out there on the state and federal level. We're excited about some of the work at the FCC right now, Commissioner, with the agreement that was recently made on the Universal Service Fund and standalone. Senator Thune and I led a letter, bipartisan letter, nonpartisan letter, thank you, Angus. 61 senators joined that letter to act on standalone broadband, and the Universal Service Fund, so important for underserved areas, for low-income areas. We know we want to continue that, but we also know there's a bigger and bigger need for Wi-Fi and broadband. The Dig Once bill that a group of us have been focused on for a long time to ask cities and other entities when they dig up for highway projects that they also use that opportunity to put in the fiber. And just the work that needs to be done with the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Rural Utility Service and others. So I'm actually excited just because we have not seen this kind of interest for a long, long time, really since we did the stimulus bill. I was just on Friday out in Winthrop, Minnesota, where they're courting a medical school. Don't tell anyone if anyone's competing. No, I'm kidding. And they're close to closing the deal because we don't have enough doctors in rural parts of our country. And the meeting was a little bit about that, but it was mostly about broadband. And that town itself has good Wi-Fi, but they want to connect all of the surrounding counties and townships so everyone can join in this as well. So this is just the beginning. It's our launch of our caucus, but I know there's a lot of other senators that are interested in this as well, and I thank the other senators for their leadership. And I'm having my entire staff over to my apartment, and I still have to vacuum. So I'm going to go, and I will leave it in their able hands. Thank you very much. And now, from the great state of Arkansas, Senator Bozeman. Thank you for being here.
No, and very quickly, first of all, I want to thank my colleagues for being here. And as you can see, this is a very bipartisan, very talented group that really are committed to helping rural America. I had the opportunity when I was elected to the House in 2001 in a special election to serve on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Shelley and I sat together for 9 years as I was there, and now we sit together on Environment and Public Works. But used to, in the old days, you'd think of public works, you'd think of transportation infrastructure in terms of roads and bridges, the interstates, you know, all of those kind of things are navigable waters. Now we simply have to think in terms of, along with that, broadband, having the ability to get online. If you don't have that ability, you simply are not going to have the economy, the area is not going to thrive, because that's become such an integral part of our society. And the amazing thing is how quickly that's done. You know, some of us, in fact, most of us, you know, that simply was not a factor in our lives at all, and now is just an integral part of our lives. So that's really what this is all about, is us working together, and I appreciate all the industry that's here, your support, trying to get the job done. It's amazing, the numbers here, but I think in much of Arkansas, in much of rural Arkansas, it's closer to 80% that don't have coverage, and I would say that's true in, you know, in the states, the rural states that are here also. So we appreciate your support, and again, this is something that we're going to lay our ears back and get done. Thank you.
Commissioner Rosenworkel, did I get that right? Okay. I don't know if you want to stand. We'll just thank you for coming today. She's the FCC commissioner. Our statistics are based here and here by the FCC. I'm going to say one little quick anecdote, open it up for one or two questions, and then we'll be on our way, because this is just the beginning. But, you know, we just had a major flood in West Virginia, and thank you all for your thoughts, and a lot of people sent water and other necessary items to the state, because it was really, we lost 23 people. So we sent, FEMA goes in, you know, that's the big resource, goes in, 500 people come into the state of West Virginia. Well, what do you do about the woman who doesn't have access? They'd say, everybody has to sign up, you have to sign up. and sign up online. Just go to our website like it's, you know, peas and carrots, as Forrest Gump would say. And so, you know, and it's not so simple. So that's another dimension, I think, is the first responder response, FEMA, and other vital services coming in quickly to a very damaged community. So with that, I want to thank my colleagues. Everybody's had a good perspective, I think, on what we're going to do. We're going to have another rollout or concentration in September. We haven't quite decided what we're going to do, what direction we're going to say. I would like to thank Victoria Flood in my office. She has done a wonderful job. She can take credit for this and all the other things. So Victoria, thank you. So does anybody have any questions? So you all know what we're so good. We just like rolled it right out. So thank you all for coming. Please enjoy the refreshments. Thanks, guys. And let's make sure that the next time we hang something up like this, that we have much better statistics. I think John's absolutely correct. In certain areas of West Virginia, absolutely. It's way beyond the 48%, which is not good, up into the 70s or 80s. Thank you all very much.